interested in running because I believe there's a problem with partisanship. The Democrats and Republicans overall have become so divisive. It's been detrimental to, in my view, to the country. It's become counterproductive. I think there was like 53 bills passed in 2013. So the other thing that the parties have failed to accomplish is addressing issues of poverty and jobs, and I believe that is due to the corruption of money coming into politics. So part of my goals are to take all the private funding out of elections and try to eliminate as much lobbying as possible. I don't think you can accomplish that being a Democrat or Republican because both the parties have already been bought out to the point where there's no progress that can be made. So that's why I'm running as an independent. Additionally, as an independent, I believe you're free to think for yourself. There's less possibility that you fall subject to groupthink error, and you are able to evaluate things intelligently and with critical thinking. Whereas if you're a member of a party, you are a lot of times coerced to vote the way the party does. And I have a big problem with being a rank and file Democrat or Republican and being told how to think. I want to be able to intelligently look at each issue as it comes to me. So on that, one of my biggest issues is bringing the jobs back to the United States, because since the 1970s, we've had a lot of globalization. The jobs have been moved overseas, about 5.5 million of them. And if we return those, that's about $320 billion in wages and about $119 billion in tax revenue that can come back. In addition to that, there are about 2.5 to 5 jobs that will return with that because of the support jobs in positions like, for example, where a manufacturing facility is located. There are support functions around that. So the $320 billion number in wages is a very conservative estimate. It's probably way higher than that. And with that, of course, comes better education, less poverty, and more tax revenue to pay for the programs that we need.
Thank you. I'm Kevin Midbus. Basically, my platform is it's a free country. The idea, well, I am for 100% of the Constitution, 100% of the time. My idea is that, basically people are free to do what they want to do to pursue their happiness. That's one of the things that people forget, is that we have the right to the pursuit of happiness. It's not the right. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get happiness. It means you can pursue what you want to do to achieve your goals, your happiness. I'm probably a little bit different. Well, I'm running as a person who prefers the Republican Party, but I agree with Josh that neither party is really any good. But when it comes between choosing, you kind of have to choose a party, and I, don't necessarily see a point in saying I prefer being independent or Republican or Democrat. I just seems Republicans, with more people, since we have a whole bunch of people on the list running as Republicans, it seemed logical to me to pick Republican, because then more people will have to be a little more educated about who they're choosing, instead of just picking the R or the D on their list. As far as like Josh talked about campaign finance, I'm a little bit different. Being just more like a regular person who has never been in politics before, looking at what I have to do to finance my campaign, what I have to give to the government, to me it's unconstitutional. It's illegal. Because essentially, if you make a donation to me, I have to give them your private information, and we have I work at a drugstore where your private information is supposed to be protected. We can get in big trouble if, say, we give out or have your private information laying around because of the HIPAA laws. And for some reason, I can't write your name and phone number on a piece of paper and just leave it laying around. But I can get your name and phone number and where you work and post it up on the internet for everyone to see. That just doesn't make sense to me. I honestly believe there shouldn't be any limits on campaign finance. You decide. You should be free to give away your money. It's that simple. And I shouldn't have the right to give people your private information. I also believe people, as far as education, since we're in a college, we'll talk about education, people should have the right to decide where they want to go to school, where they want to spend their money to go to school, instead of being forced to have money taken away from them to fund a school that maybe they don't agree with or you don't ever plan on going to. So I kind of believe people should have that choice. Shouldn't. I like debate, but I'm not that much of a public speaker. I don't like that too much.
My name's Parker Muller, and I'm actually working with George Seacott. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it today, but I've got a little prepared speech from him that he'd like me to read for you guys. So I'm here representing George Seacott, a candidate for the Washington's 4th Congressional District. While George would have liked to make it here, he asked me to talk about 3 things he aims to accomplish when elected. First, he will address the healthcare law. George has worked as a healthcare attorney for over 20 years, and since the day President Obama signed the Affordable Care Act into law, he has helped employers comply with its provisions. At this point, the law is doing more harm than good, and he has the skills to make the adjustments to rebuild a healthcare system that provides quality healthcare to all Americans while reducing the cost of that healthcare. Second, he wants to help balance the budget. No president, Republican or Democrat, should be spending more money than our country takes in year after year. Half the budget is based upon retirement and healthcare spending, areas George has worked on for over 20 years. When elected, George plans to take his skills and expertise into retirement and healthcare to reduce the cost of providing those benefits, while maintaining and improving the level of benefits people receive. This may sound difficult, but George has made a career of doing that for his clients, and now he wants to serve in Congress doing the same. Third, George has a deep respect for the Constitution. George attended BYU Law School, a school founded with the purpose of training statesmen who would stand up and defend the Constitution. Our Constitution needs defending. Because all 3 branches of government, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, have all overreached their powers and attempted to do more than the Constitution permits, while eroding our rights in the process. Most specifically, George believes that the freedom of religion is under attack, the most in our country. Just for looking at the lawsuits, statements, and attitude of the government against these rights on a daily basis. Overall, George is a skilled, trained leader who will solve the healthcare crisis, balance the budget, and restore respect for the Constitution by using his years of expertise to making these things happen. George is working hard to earn your vote and asks that if you want to see positive changes for all Americans, you vote for him on August 5th.
Awesome. Thank you all for those quick, brief introductions. Right now, let's go ahead and open up to the floor. Yes.
Would you mind reading that
Oh,
statement from?
I apologize.
Gordon
We
Frost.
do have a statement here from Gordon Frost. He unfortunately was unable to attend. I'll go ahead and read his statement out real quick for us. It begins, America's brother in arms. General George Washington's 25 cents is now worth 1 red-headed leaking penny. For every $1 Congress spends of our money, Congress borrows 60 cents, plus interest. In such a financial crisis, American laws aren't worth the paper they're written on. 2014 is Gordon's 8th time on Washington's federal ballot. In 98, Gordon's strategy in paying off America's $4 trillion debt was censored. Now we're pushing $18 trillion. Our Supreme Court crucified the First Amendment by uncapping billionaires' powers with only one thing in mind: to make the rich even wealthier, explaining unborn generations of poor children. Our Supreme Court has endorsed monopoly, censorship, corruption, and conspiracy. Consequently, the USA is up for auction. Our institutions have been decimated. Therefore, freedom, liberty, and justice must return in order for free and fair amendment elections to function. Liberty and freedom pin their wings on equality. If they aren't taxed fairly, Americans will have neither. 10% of wealth is legislated to 95% of we the people in order to pay America's lamb share tax of 10% of income from 100% of we the people is appropriated to pay 100% of the nation's tax. Therefore, axe the tax. Abolish federal, state, and local taxes, fees, write-offs, loopholes, and shelters. Federal, state, local governments shall receive 3.33%, which totals 9.99%. The remaining 0.01 shall provide for First Amendment elections. Thus, citizens shall keep 90% of their income, restoring Washington's quarter from 1 cent to 25 cents gross every month's paycheck into 2 years of checks. 2 years of work becomes 50 years worth of checks. In 1964, in front of 4,000 plus at CWSC, Barry Goldwater couldn't answer my questions concerning Vietnam. For 50 years, Gordon has challenged America's freedom. Federally elected loudmouths, Gordon guarantees new approaches in America towards goals we deserve. And that is the brief plank that Gordon Cross has sent for us. Unfortunately, that's all we'll hear because he is not here to answer any other questions. But I believe right now, for a quick bit, we'll open up to the floor for any questions. If anybody has any for our candidates, feel free to blurt out if you have any. If not, I can go ahead and to some of the questions that have already been pre-submitted to us.
Want me to ask a question?
If you have a question, you're more than welcome to as well.
Well, yeah, I know. Because I am not only am I a candidate, I'm a voter. Will the other candidates state that they are for 100% of the Constitution 100% of the time?
Can you restate the question?
Will the candidates state that they are for 100% of the Constitution 100% of the time?
I think you need to be more specific on the question. To me, it seems like a very open-ended question left for interpretation. I would also ask, has anyone of the candidates here signed up in uniform to defend that Constitution? That is my answer to your question.
Okay. Well, I haven't.
Well, I can't completely speak on George's half 100%, but I know that, like I said, he is for defending the Constitution at pretty much all costs. He's been going to law school and he knows what he's doing with it, so he has a very good understanding, and I don't think he'd be running if he felt that the Constitution didn't need to be defended. So I guess that's best I can really say for that aspect.
Okay, thanks.
And yourself?
Yeah, I already stated it in my opening, but yes, I'd be for 100% of the Constitution 100% of the time.
We'll go ahead and move on. In the essence, to be fair, all these questions will remain anonymous unless the person who asked the question is here and they would like to acknowledge that. Otherwise, they will go ahead and remain anonymous. The first one, and I'm just going to grab these at random, there's no particular order, is what exactly is your candidate stance on gun control? Let's go ahead and start with Parker.
All right. Well, I know George wants to defend the Second Amendment right at all costs, and that there's a lot of laws that are enacted now that don't necessarily make sense that they're doing. For one, a lot of the rules for trying to take away some guns, such as the assault weapons ban that they have going on, is seen as more as a attack on the Second Amendment right, when they use the primary reason for why they should have the assault rifle ban in place because they want to protect American citizens from the terrible atrocities of massive shootings. But if you go look at a lot of the records of what those events occurred, none of them, almost all of them, were used with low caliber handguns or other kind of weapons like that nature, which the ban is more kind of just a showpiece for it. So I can say that George definitely has the idea in mind to defend the Second Amendment.
Kevin?
Well, it's essentially unconstitutional. We're not just talking about the Second Amendment here. We're talking about like the Fourth and Fifth, and that you're essentially instead of being innocent until proven guilty, you're guilty unless proven innocent, which is completely unconstitutional. The only way you can really have any kind of gun control is if you did essentially amend the Constitution to allow for this idea of guilty until proven innocent, or to just plain out ban guns, which doesn't necessarily work when you take the idea that with current prohibition laws that we have, like when they prohibited alcohol, they still had alcohol. With they prohibited marijuana, we still have marijuana. But the thing you have to think about as far as gun laws, that it's kind of more like a state issue. It's the state government kind of should deal with that, but at the same time, it's not constitutional. What was I going to say? If you look at the statistics for like gun violence or just overall violent crime in our state, you have about I think the calculation was on that for me, it was 0.008% chance of being a victim of a violent crime. That's what the statistics are. It's like 4 out of 100,000 people experience a violent crime, but the majority of that it comes from. You don't really have to worry about it for the most part because most of that comes from like gangbanger types of people. It's not like law-abiding citizens with concealed carry permits or things like that. Yeah.
Okay. And Josh?
I haven't seen recently any laws on gun control that I would agree with at this point. I believe that there's been a lot of ideas introduced, but they haven't been thoroughly vetted. For example, one could claim that, this person is not mentally capable of owning a gun or is capable of committing a crime. The criteria for judging what that capability is very subjective, right? So at this point, I do not endorse or would support any additional gun legislation. We do currently have, obviously, background checks for new weapons. Beyond that, I don't see myself supporting any additional gun legislation.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Can I ask a related question?
If anybody has a related question, feel free to speak up. Do not hesitate to interrupt me.
What is your view of preventing felons from being able to carry guns?
Preventing felons from being able to carry guns. So as the law currently stands,
Yes.
sweet. I believe felons with a history of violent crime should not be allowed to own a gun. Obviously, there is the issue of control. You cannot physically control control, then all you can do is place administrative boundaries on them and say, well, you're not allowed to. Does that prevent them from getting one? Probably not. I have a friend who has dual residency in Mexico and America. And down in Mexico, they're not allowed to own guns. And he has lived in both places, and he stated that where in Mexico they were not allowed to own guns, all the criminals did, right? And so they have mass kidnappings, murders, and there's nothing for the citizens to defend themselves with, right? And also, if you look at the history of the Mexican government has, carried out enormous atrocities against its own people several times. So, and, they have little rights. At this point, I do not see any way that would be possible in America or even favorable to have gun control.
No. Okay. Well, I just wonder why they'd be out of jail.
That's the next good question.
I mean, if they're a violent criminal and you let them out and you expect that if they get a gun they're going to commit a violent crime with it, then why are they even out of jail? That's about all I can say.
Yeah, I know George. He agrees with the somewhat the current constraints on getting guns to felons, and also the mentally unstable, I guess, or I don't know technically how they label it in the background checks. But then once again, like they were saying, it's if someone really wants to have a gun, they're gonna find a way to get a gun. So having the law in place gives us a way to enforce it a little bit, but in the end, yeah, I don't know how much it really works, I guess.
Can I add just a little bit more? I should have thought of this, but one of the things is a lot of people who are prohibited from owning guns, they might use marijuana either recreationally or medically, and that essentially makes it illegal for them to own a gun, and that's part of the criminals that you might. I mean, they're not actually criminals. They've just smoked or used marijuana for whatever their reason, and they're not actually violent criminals. So I really don't see any reason to prevent them from owning a gun.
Any other questions? If not, we'll move on to another one. What would you do as a congressman to help improve the smaller communities of your area you're representing? Let's go ahead and start with you today, Kevin.
Okay. Well, I'd stop all the laws from being created if I could. I'd basically vote no for every law unless it repeals something, because what we need to do is allow people to keep more of their money. I'd like to get rid of ultimately I'd like to get rid of the Federal Reserve, because they're just printing money. It's basically counterfeiting, and it's causing inflation, and it destroys your savings. What I prefer to do is, as far as like taxes, people need to be able to own and spend their money. And when we have more money just localized, instead of sending it over to Washington, the other Washington, our economy will grow. We'll have more money here instead of half of it being spent in bureaucracy and then sent back over here to create jobs, which the government doesn't do. It just redistributes wealth. It'll create jobs. Maybe they'll create 50 jobs, but they'll take 2 jobs out of all the other states combined. So, yeah.
Josh?
So, I have several plans for that. Obviously, there are limitations when you're a federal candidate or a federal representative because you're making federal decisions. But obviously, there is some influence, and there's some things that you can do and things that you can push federally that will impact the state of Washington. So my biggest thing, like I said before, is bringing back jobs from overseas. So bringing that back, that 5.5 million jobs. Essentially, if you look at the trade deficit and its impact on Washington State, and even more specifically the 4th congressional district, I think in the last 10 years there's been about a $13 billion impact to just 4th district by itself. Okay, all other things being equal, that's assuming, you know, with economics that you spread out everything, peanut butter spread it across, and that's what you get. So essentially bringing back those jobs is going to also make the wages go up by themselves, right? It's the laws of supply and demand. Right now we have a low demand for labor, therefore the wages automatically just keep dropping as time goes on. Essentially, middle class earners right now should be making about $19,000 more per year, right in that range, depending on what industry. But that's the average. I mean, can you imagine what you could do with $19,000 more per year? Obviously, that is what's impacting poverty and education and crime rates and split up families, and the reason why we need the Affordable Care Act, because people do not have the money to pay for the things that they used to at one time. We've had a 250% increase in productivity since, I want to say it was in the early 70s. With that productivity, there was only 112% increase in wages. So shipping all the jobs overseas has reduced the demand for labor and also reduced the wages at the same time, right? So bringing those jobs back from overseas is going to make all wages go up across the United States, because if jobs are lost, for example, in a manufacturing facility back east, then what happens? People start looking all over the United States for work. That drives wages down everywhere, not just in that manufacturing facility by itself. And we have 5.5 million jobs that have been lost. Those are direct jobs. That's not the up to 17 to 32 million with all support functions. That 5.5 million jobs impacts everyone. There's 47 million people in poverty right now in the United States. We are not a third world country. That's ridiculous. So the jobs being shipped overseas has had, I think, an impact on almost every facet of our government and our life. So in addition to that, there's also the Fabrio Initiative, which is the food and beverage, I forget the exact title for the acronym, but essentially it's bringing local produce that we have here, packaging it and exporting it, right? So if we can't bring jobs back, let's help offset that deficit by more exports, right? So the Fabrio Initiative that TRIDEC is working on addresses some of that issue. There's also the Mid-Columbia Energy Initiative, which is local. It's right here at Hanford. It addresses bringing energy, industry, and that type of thing into the Tri-Cities and actually ramping that up a little bit more, so that's even more local jobs in addition to bringing jobs back from overseas.
Awesome, thank you. Parker?
Well, to benefit our area greatly, our main areas of economy is based off of the energy sector from Hanford, the agriculture sector, especially once we start going north over into the other counties. It's even a bigger industry for them. So to kind of make those better, to help benefit our local communities, we can do it by also fixing the Affordable Care Act, so it helps employers be able to not be taxed as much, and they will also be able to have a better grounds for the small local businesses, because it's hard for them to pay employees. So that's one thing we need to do, is help fix that act so we can start trading healthcare systems across state boundaries. Because right now, as Washington State goes, we only have 3 choices for healthcare plans, and with only 3 choices, it makes it a little harder to have any room to compete, where people are gonna, like with more choices, there'll be more ability for people to have to bring the prices down, so that will benefit local businesses and communities. And then obviously pushing for the Farm Bill to get it more correct is another huge thing, because it subsidizes so much of our industries around here, and also a lot of the Farm Bill is based off of the food stamps kind of sector. That's a majority of the farm bill is actually that. So we need to fix that around to where we actually start. One second. Funding what needs to be done in just farming, and also protecting farmers from years of drought or other natural disasters that will make a detrimental impact on our economy. For example, Yakima County is the #1 county in producing or in farm production for Washington State and 12th in the country. So it is extremely important that that continues to grow, and just as well as everywhere else in the in our district. Also, immigration is a huge thing, because if we don't have comprehensive immigration reform, then our community will suffer quite a bit, because we rely on a lot of manual labor that we need to figure out how to exactly work into the situation a bit better. And yeah, those are just a few things. I mean, obviously I can't completely speak in fully on George's behalf, but I just know from talking with him and being around with him while he's talking, those are some of the few things that I know he can help to benefit our local communities by slightly helping fixing some of those woes, I guess.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sorry,
oh,
I had a question. So, Josh,
Yes.
you said we aren't a third world country, but a lot of people here in the United States don't work because they rely solely on food stamps and cash assistance. And a lot of people, because they know they have that kind of access, they decide not to work, because for cash assistance, I think it's about 5 years that you can receive help on cash assistance, and then after that you get cut off. I mean, if people are taking advantage of this, what do you think can be done to prevent people from relying on these types of sources and actually going out to look for work? As I forgot your name.
Parker.
He mentioned that there's a lot of manual labor out there, like field work, but a lot of people are too lazy to go out there and pick some apples or cherries. And we have people coming from other countries to come and do that type of work for us. Like, what do you think can be done to stop lazy people from sitting around in their couches and actually work?
Well, obviously you can't totally control people, but I think monitoring, there's probably got to be a little bit more tighter monitoring on the assistance programs and more validation of why they're not able to provide for themselves. My wife, before we got married, she was a single parent, and she worked very hard to be able to provide for her kids by herself without having to use federal assistance. And she was successful, but by the time that we had met, she had actually bought her own house and got off all the programs and all that kind of stuff. But she worked very hard to get where she was at, and she's just one example of many that I know of people that are just trying to scrape by, and welfare and food stamp are their last resort, right? But the things that get publicized on TV by certain parties is that the welfare program is just there feeding all the lazy people. I agree, there are some lazy people. There's always going to be lazy people. And that's where the monitoring comes in, right? But the first thing I think we have to do is give people the opportunity to provide for themselves. Right now, there is very little opportunity. Look at myself, for example. And by the way, I'm adjunct faculty in the project management program right here at CBC. But several years ago, I was laid off from my job. And I have 2 bachelor's degrees. I have 2 bachelor's degrees, a master's degree, and I'm a certified project management professional. Okay? For 6 months, I was out of work. 6 months. That's ridiculous. I did everything I was told to do. Everything. And then some, right? I mean, they say, go out, get your bachelor's degree, go get your job, right? No, I went, got 2 bachelor's degrees, then a master's degree and certification, and I've worked with over $250 million in my career, and it's took me 6 months. That is horrible, and that is what's happening around the United States, right? And because that's happening, it's driving everyone in general into a lower wage category. And what happens when people fall into that lower wage category? They now are capable of getting on federal assistance. They now qualify for that, right? So first we have to give them the opportunity to provide for themselves. And then once that opportunity is given, we can actually now go and start even do more heavy monitoring, right? Okay, now you have the opportunity. We have set up places like WorkSource, right? WorkSource has 2,000 jobs posted. Someone's going to get a job, right? If you're required to go to WorkSource, for example, in order to get your federal assistance or local state assistance, then now you're forced to look for work. And if you've got so many jobs in the queue, people are going to find work. But that's just not the case right now. We have to give them the opportunity first, and then we can start lowering some of those programs to match the supply and demand.
Okay, so do you think like how for unemployment we have to go do 3 search logs a week? Do you think that they should do the same thing for people receiving food stamps and cash assistance?
Yes, if they're capable of working. I'm not sure what the qualifications are as far as deeming them if they are or not capable of working. But I would say if that program is not there, it needs to be put in place. It's something that determines whether they are capable of working, right? And if they are capable of working, then yes, you should be going to WorkSource to try to get a job, and you should be documenting that and having some kind of proof.
Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Thanks.
Is there any other questions from the audience? If not, I actually have one myself. I said earlier that I would serve in the Army. Right now I'm using the post 9/11 GI Bill, which is a great program, but it does have some flaws. Most notably is the fact that they only pay you the basic allowance for housing. Depending on the amount that you get is dependent upon how much school there is. So, for example, Washington's in here is $1,200 a month, roughly, for basic allowance for housing. That's your basic housing cost as if you're a sergeant with a family. If school goes from the 1st of the month to the 30th month, you will get that chunk. If school goes from the 2nd of the month to the 30th of the month, you'll most likely get only $1,000. The less school days that the school's in session, not necessarily weekends and holidays, but stuff like that, you don't get as much. Now, that I'm not seeing as a problem. The issue that I'm seeing is they designed the GI Bill so veterans can come back and focus on their schoolwork and take care of that, and not have to worry about paying their bills. With it set up this way, especially with schools that are on the quarter system, which have a lot of breaks, it makes it a lot more difficult. That being said, is there any way that if you do get you the seat, that you would help to improve not just for the GI Bill, but for student loans, student aid, so that students can focus solely on their schoolwork and not have to worry about making sure they have a roof over their head so they can do their homework. Parker, go ahead.
That's a little more complicated of an answer than I could really, or a question I can really speak on too much for George, but I know that he does believe that we do have a problem with our federal spending, and currently a lot of programs for veterans are being cut to kind of help balance the budget. He doesn't believe that is right. There should be other ways that we should be able to balance the budget without kind of putting on the backs of the people who actually went out and served for America to protect our liberty and our freedom. He thinks that it should be like a last minute kind of different cut instead of right now they kind of throw it in there every once in a while just because they know they can kind of get away with cutting some of the money to those sort of programs. So honestly, I'm sorry I can't really speak too much into that, but that's kind of just a little blurb I can give.
Yes.
I always have answers, either it's I don't know or. But what we're really looking at is the problem of how expensive school and housing and that kind of stuff really is. So we need to look at what is causing it to be so expensive, which it's inflation. It's this inflation created by the Federal Reserve by printing money. When you expand the money, when you have more money, everything gets more expensive. It's basic economics. I'm sure maybe most of us in here have actually taken economics class. So what would happen if we stop that money printing, then inflation will for the most part stop, because what inflation is, it's inflating everything in the economy, not just specific items. So when you get rid of that inflation, you won't have, well, we'll end up with deflation, which for whatever reason is scary to people. It essentially makes deflation makes the value of the money you have in your pocket grow. It'll make your dollar go from being worth just the 2 cents it's worth today to being worth $1 again. So it essentially, deflation will make your savings worth more, so which will inevitably cause the cost for school and housing and that type of stuff to go down, because you'll have money to spend instead of having to get loans with all this money printing, which results in costs going even higher. So what I really advocate is, let's say for the veterans, instead of coming up with some bill that has all kinds of requirements, it's for school, why don't we just give them the money? That's pretty much it. Let's just, for veterans, let's just give them the money and let them do what they want with it. If they want to go to school and learn, go to school and learn with it.
Josh?
Obviously, I'm a veteran, and I've spent a lot of time with veterans, and I still have a lot of veteran friends. My campaign manager is a Vietnam veteran and a Marine, and I'm Army, so we have our little spats now and again. Anyway, yeah. So anything to do with veterans, I think obviously the answer is yes. If there needs to be an increase in BAH, for example, or BAS, or BAS is not included during education reform, just BAH. So if BAH needs to be raised in order to compensate for that, that's great. Anything to do with veterans and education should be approved. Obviously, there's been some changes recently. One of the bills for veterans, I believe, was voted down by the Republicans recently, which was amazing to me because in the military, you always look to the Republicans to pass anything that has to do with veterans benefits. And so that was just a huge blow to me. I couldn't believe it. But that's beside the point. When it comes to funding public education or education like here at Columbia Basin College, I believe that maybe even a better idea is to start incorporating some of the high school with CBC, right? For example, my daughter is in the Running Start program right now, and she decided to go in for her senior year instead of her junior year, which is fine. But essentially that saved 1 year of her college education. Right now she was 1 year ahead of the program. If you can do that with every single student and start them as a junior in CBC, they're 2 years ahead of the program. Why not make that the same across the entire nation? Why are we burning up 2 years? Why are we wasting 2 years in high school, right? The other thing too is with the cuts in federal funding and sending money to the states, etc., that has significantly impacted the tuition for education. Significantly. I was talking to one of the vice chancellors over at WSU, and I was trying to get an explanation as to why is it that tuition has went up so high. And it is because a lot of those funding programs have been cut. So what's happening? The big billionaires are up there mandating that they don't want taxes on capital gains or whatever the case may be, right? And they save money for themselves, and less taxes and revenue go into the system that would have been spread out to pay for the education that used to be paid for at one point, or at least helped pay for some of the programs at the universities. So I believe that those programs need to be better funded because all of that is being passed on to students. And in combination with low wages and now paying double what you would have to pay for tuition, it's almost pointless to go to school. Almost, right? It's not, but it's almost. Because now you're gonna go to school, you're gonna rack up $100,000 in student loans, and then you're gonna go and get a job that is worth $19,000 less than what it used to be.
Thank you. Open up again for the audience. Okay. Another one that was submitted to us. What is your stance on gay marriage? Kevin, let's go ahead and start with you.
Well, my stance on marriage in general is take government out of it. Everyone has a right to their opinion and their beliefs, and I mean, ultimately, what I believe doesn't matter. The government should not be telling people what to believe, whether it's opposed or for. So I'm just advocating marriage should not be in government at all. It's not an institution that is. It's not a constitutional institution. It's a discriminatory institution. It just should not be there.
Josh?
I am for marriage equality for everyone, whether that be homosexual or heterosexual or whatever the case may be.
Parker?
I honestly, I can't really speak on George's behalf for this one. Talked a lot about budget concerns with him and these kind of, I wouldn't really say smaller social issues, but maybe we just...
Do you mind if I've talked to George at length about this. Do you mind if
Unless I don't have an issue, do the other
No
candidates?
objections.
George and I first talked about this very early on, and his main concern was that there's two sides to the issue of gay marriage. One is that there's people with religious beliefs who look to the Bible and other scriptures for their explanation of marriage. And the Bible, religion, says marriage is between a man and a woman. And that is their belief. That is their right to have that belief. Now, the other side of the issue is people who look at it with more of a progressive view, and they say, well, scriptural views of it, times have changed, times have progressed, things are different, things aren't as cut and dry as the very as religious adherents would believe. So marriage should be allowed because, as Kevin pointed out, it's kind of gotten the government intermingled in it. There's a lot of issues there about equality, due process of law, equal protection, and so the problem that we see is that there's no way to ever get the two sides to reconcile their beliefs. The religious are never going to believe that gay marriage is okay, and those in favor of gay marriage are never going to say, okay, we give up, we won't get married anymore, you win. It's never going to happen. But there still needs to be something done about this debate. We have right here in Richland a big debate with Arlene's Flowers. There was a case there where she didn't want to, she had plenty of people of, homosexual and heterosexual views come in and get flowers from her. Well, when she was asked, hey, can you do flowers for our wedding? Her religious beliefs made her pause and say, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. And that got her into some legal trouble. Now, the biggest thing that we could do is provide both sides a way that we can at least get some sort of consensus on this. If we look at this view and say, okay, gay marriage and heterosexual marriage, we're never going to reconcile. If we were to allow gay marriage to occur, but also allow those with strict religious adherent beliefs to abstain from doing things like arranging flowers for a wedding for a gay couple, or allowing churches to not have to perform those weddings. That would allow the religious to retain their beliefs and not feel like they're being pushed into an agenda that they don't agree with on a religious basis. These people are God-fearing, hell-fearing people. To force them to perform services for gay marriage, they legitimately fear that this is risking them hellfire. This is not something the government should force on people. So allowing people, just like in times before when we have conscientious objectors, said if your views are that you cannot participate more, okay, we understand and we will recognize that right. We can do the same for gay marriage. So the religious and those in favor of gay marriage can both at least have some inkling of their beliefs intact.
Okay. Let's see. Let's go ahead and go to another sheet. Why is it that you or your candidate desires to hold this office? Josh, let's go ahead and start with you this time.
The biggest thing that I have an issue with is the corruption of the parties. And I think everyone is now realizing how the parties have negatively impacted the country. If you look at the government shutdown, especially after the government shutdown, it really opened people's minds to see what was really going on over there and how counterproductive the parties have become. Right now, there are 90 independents running for federal positions across the United States right now, and that's growing on a daily basis. As a matter of fact, we're forming an independent coalition because it is growing so fast. It's essentially a very historical event because people are frustrated with the parties. In addition to that, 65% of millennials now identify as independents and 42% of all Americans. So I think that people realize that money has completely taken over the political spectrum and that the corruption of the parties is tied right in with that money. There's no way to really essentially break that tie. They're too ingrained. The billionaires are too ingrained. The super PACs are too ingrained. One Republican or Democrat is not going to go in and be able to change their own party. It's too corrupted now. So the only way out is through independence. And we're Americans. We declared independence back in 1776 from the monarchs of England. Why are we not declaring independence now? Have we lost the guts to do so? I don't think so. I think it's just, this is the beginning. And so really that is at the heart of why I'm running, is independence. Because we're Americans. We are independent. We were born independent. We're not, I choose to think for myself and not be told by a party how to think. I'm not going to align with the party. I'm not going to align with something that's unintelligent for the sake of partisanship and loyalty to groupthink error and tribalism. That is really at the core. The secondary to that, or almost pretty much just as important, is we're bringing the jobs back from America to America. Because that essentially is what is going to stabilize so many other things. We're all fighting over breadcrumbs underneath the table. Why? Because there's so little of them, right? So if we bring all those wages back, now we have more wages to go around. We have a way for people to take care of themselves. And when they can take care of themselves, they're happier. And when they're happier, they're more productive. And there's more tax revenue going into the system to pay down the national debt. But if we keep fighting over the breadcrumbs, we're not going to really change anything. The economy is shrinking. As it gets smaller, the same dollars are still circulating within that economy, right? $500 billion, $500 billion a year is going overseas. $500 billion. That economy is going like this, but you can't see it. It's moving so slow. And with that $500 million that's going away every year, the circulation is just smaller and smaller. So what are we doing? We're squeezing each other, trying to fight for what's left, right? So you have to bring those wages back. There was a time in America where we had American prosperity. It was when we had jobs. It was when people were able to take care of themselves. So that is at the very heart of my platform of why I'm running. Independence and bringing the jobs back from overseas.
Thank you. Kevin?
Okay, why am I running? Well, mainly what I say is I'm the only one I can trust to be for 100% of the Constitution 100% of the time. But one of the other things is I do kind of want to educate people on freedom and what it really means. You know, I talk about we need to get rid of the Federal Reserve for one thing, and there's people who are like, we need it for all this inflation to pay for debt. And what I really want to say is I don't know the answers. I want people to figure out the answers for themselves. So like with the Federal Reserve, it has sole control over our economy. It can make it grow or shrink as it chooses. It picks the interest rates and such. What I'm saying is, we can if people want a system like that and they want a bank like that, we can have that, but we don't want to force people to have to live off of that one system, which is sort of why I believe that the government is actually constitutionally mandated to have gold and silver as the form of currency. I mean, as far as holding value, gold and silver is the best because it has its uses in like electronics and such, and people like to wear gold as jewelry. But it is still essentially a currency. But what this would allow is if a new bank pops up with their own form of currency, then people could go back to this gold and silver standard instead of being, completely screwed because our money is not backed by anything. So what I'm ultimately advocating is people should be free to make their decisions. How someone should do something is not my business. They can do it how they want. If they fail, great, because failure is, what is that quote? Failure is the mother of invention or something. So, I mean, we're getting to a point where failure is not an option. We can't accept failure. Failure is how we learn. So I want people to do whatever it is they think is best for themselves.
Well, and this is actually a question I have asked myself to George, so I can actually give a pretty decent answer on it. Well, first off, George, he is a big family and religious man. And those two things all revolve around the community and our aspects of, when you get to another level of it, our entire nation. And he has, he said he's grown his family. He has 7 kids. His wife's like, no more, not going to be doing any more of that. So they're cutting off there, but they still feel they have a service to do to help American society and also just to provide a better future for their own children. He's been running a successful law firm over in Kenway for the last 20 years. He could keep doing that, or he feels now that, hey, I can go, money's not everything, I can take a bit of a pay cut and go and try to show people that I have an expertise in a lot of the areas of America where we need some extra help. So he really has an idea that it's more of a service, and it's not just him, it's also his wife is one of his biggest supporters, and that's because she knows he can be the good change that we need to see in Congress and also to represent the 4th District. So just overall, it's mainly just as a service idea behind it. He has no intentions of being a career-long politician. There's a lot of them in this election that are kind of leaning that way, but he just wants to, feels like this is the right time, that he has a set of expertise that he could actually benefit the country. So he's doing it as a service idea more than anything.
Awesome, thank you. Go ahead.
I'm curious how you guys feel about term limits, and if there should be term limits, what they should be.
I believe a term limit should be limited to 12 years total, because that's essentially the same as 2 Senate terms combined.
It's basically more arbitrary numbers. The representative position which we're going for is 2 years. All you have to do is vote us out. I mean, pretty much. We shouldn't have to really. I believe we shouldn't have to really have government be in control of our lives. So it shouldn't matter. Because if we're following the Constitution as it's written, it shouldn't matter who gets in office because they're required to follow the Constitution. They're gonna take an oath to obey the Constitution when they get in office. So ultimately, what I'm saying about it, educating people, is we need to be educated about who we're picking. I mean, I'm the only one here. I'm recording this, I hope, because we need to hold our politicians accountable. So I think that people would be wanting to know what the candidates are doing.
Well, like I said, George is he's not a career-minded politician. He definitely, so I can't completely say. I mean, can't never discuss this with him, but I could see him being in favor of somewhat having term limits, but then at the same time, that's not in the Constitution. The Constitution lays out how long people can serve for, so then it does kind of just come back to the citizens of our districts to be choosing it by themselves. So I'm sorry, I can't really answer too great on that one.
Another question that's come to me from outside the CBC community, from the larger community, is the pipeline to Texas that they were wanting to build from Canada through Texas. What is your stance on that? The oil pipeline.
Keystone.
The Keystone. Thank you. Yes. Kevin?
I get to go first. I don't even know why our federal government is really looking at this. I don't know why it should have control over this. Isn't it a business? I mean, businesses, if they want to build it, they should buy the land and build it through wherever. But but for the most part, if it should be maybe the states that it's going to be built through, they should, be in somewhat decide on whether they want that going through their state or not. But ultimately, whoever's building it needs to, own the land that they're building it on. That's about all I can really say.
I don't know that there's any land issues or detrimental environmental issues. Obviously, if that's a problem, then that should be corrected. I think the long-term issue here is obviously sustainable energy.
Okay.
I've got a little bit of background in renewable energy, working with some solar and wind development, and I believe that there is so many other resources available, such as solar energy, for example, that we could be powering the entire United States just from solar by itself. Why are we still using fossil fuels? It's almost ridiculous, right? We're in 2014. This is the 21st century. So I don't know what the big argument is. Obviously, I think it's still a fight for power and money. There's some big oil industries out there that still rely on oil being dug out of the ground and used, right? Obviously, we still need it, and there's going to be a long transition, but I think that transition should take a little bit shorter period of time. I don't think that getting rid of oil, obviously, is the complete solution, but there is a lot of other renewable energy resources that are available for us to use. And why would we go and destroy other things when it's not, when it's not necessary? So my view of the Keystone Pipeline, like I said, I don't know the exact details, but if there are some issues that are going to be detrimental to people or the environment, then I would have a problem with that.
Alright, well, okay, so the main issues with the Keystone Pipeline is, for one, Canada is actually our biggest importer of oil. It's not the Middle East, it's not anywhere else. Canada, actually, we get more oil from Americans from Canada than anywhere else. And their main thing right now is the oil shale and oil sands that are up in Alberta that they want to get down to the major refineries in Texas and Louisiana along the Gulf. And so the main problem though is how many states it has to cross through to get there. So it's become a federal issue because it's not just one state that has to deal with it. It's, I mean, think about it's going across the continental U.S. basically. So the major holdups too are from aquifers that it could possibly damage if it had a leak, and then also from the aspect that it will have to be bought on certain lands, like when they did the railroads back in the 1800s, they had to use eminent domain to purchase land so they could continue that path. So that's where the major holdup is from those issues. And I know George's stance on energy is that we should also be looking for other ways to do it. We shouldn't just completely be relying on the oil and the current like fossil fuel systems. There is a lot of other options out there, but it's going to be an extremely slow process, and energy security is an essential part of American society. So I can't, because there's not technically any way of voting on it, I guess, really. There's so much public outcry against it right now and it's a private organization, so it's a really tough issue to say. So that's all I can really, I don't know. I can just talk about the issue itself. I can't really give one way or the other. I'm leaning towards it for George. Sorry.
Fair enough. Alright, and just to double check, I believe we still have roughly another 45 minutes, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm actually going to have to leave. I have to get back to Hanford where I work.
Oh, okay. Not a problem. Thank you for coming.
Yeah,
is
thank you
there
so
a
much
brief
for the
closing
invitation.
statement you'd like to give before you have to take off?
No, well, I guess a short one. I would appreciate if everyone would consider the idea and the cause of independence this year, and remember that we are changing as a nation, and I think we're waking up to see that the Republicans and the Democrats should not be the only two options. And if you look at everything bad that has happened in politics in the last 30 or 40 years, you can always point to a party. So I would leave you with that. I'm a very diversified candidate. I've spent time in construction. I'm a veteran. I will look out for veterans. I'm adjunct faculty here at CBC in the project management program. I spent some time working in renewable energy, and I currently work at Hanford. I grew up in agriculture. I've got 2 bachelor's degrees in business and a master's in management. So I believe that I am very equipped and capable of handling business, management, and economic issues, which I think is at the heart of all the problems here. So thank you so much.
And as his campaign manager, he always forgets this part. We're always looking for help, because I'm getting old. And if anybody, likes what they see or what they hear, there is another option. You keep voting the way you've been voting, you're gonna keep getting what you've been getting. Thank you.
Thank you
We're
very
gonna
much.
leave
Thanks
these,
so
if
much.
you folks would like some, or they can give them to somebody. Thank you very much.
Sorry I have to leave.
Well, I appreciate your coming.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Nice meeting you, Kevin.
Yep, nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Nice to have you over.
Thank you.
Alright, well, we do still have some more questions that have been submitted to us, so unless there's any other questions that quickly popped up, we'll go ahead and continue on. Okay. This one's a little long one. Forgive me if I stumble on some of the words. Seattle is a major international seaport. As a result of such a high volume of traffic, the quality of the waters of the Puget Sound have deteriorated. A national mandate to regulate the fuel allowed to be burned in Washington's waters could lessen the amount of pollution and contamination into our waters. What would be the plans and steps that you or your candidate would possibly take for something like that to happen to help clean up the waters of Washington State?
Ask me first. Or,
Let's go ahead
okay. I don't see why we'd have ultimately the problem is that well, I don't know the answer really. I don't. It shouldn't be a federal government dealing with something in one state or another state that's just distributing our wealth in different places. How to deal with the pollution? I think maybe there should be, if some, well, when we look, let's look at the Constitution. How if a person is being hurt by this, which we have a legal system to go through to determine if this pollution is causing problems with people. So what I'm essentially saying is I don't advocate. Well, essentially, I advocate a total free market regulation for this type of thing, which involves if a ship or something is spilling fuel out and it causes damage to someone's property or it's causing damage to someone's health, then we do have a legal system we can go through to rectify that situation. But we also have the concept of boycotts, in which if you see a shipping company that, or maybe it's just a business that sells some kind of widget somewhere that's causing all kinds of pollution, then ultimately the best solution for these businesses that's causing damage to our ecosystem is essentially a boycott. Just take the money away from them, because when instead maybe we would use federal regulations to try to force this business into being less pollutive causing less pollution, we're essentially saying that it was okay that the business is polluting everywhere, is destroying the habitat and whatnot. Whereas if we take the concept of a boycott, it takes away their money, and so either the business, when you're not buying from that business or from that shipping company, they won't be able to function, so they won't be able to pollute, so they'll have to come up with new technology to cause less pollution, or their business will just go bankrupt and no longer exist. So ultimately what I'm saying is we don't want government regulations, because it keeps new technologies that could prevent this kind of pollution from being invented, because the regulations might just say, okay, you can pollute, but just pay us this tax, and it'll all be okay, which is just doesn't make sense to me.
All right, and also I think I failed to mention yet that George prefers the Republican Party. Sorry, I think I failed to mention that yet. I just realized I probably should say that. But okay, so I think it'll come down to, as a constitutionalist, George would advocate that we follow the 10th Amendment, where a state can make whatever governing law they would like to increase, because already there is the EPA's regulatory on the Clean Water Act of the 1970s, which was a result of massive pollution that set a standard for American waterways to be held at a certain pristine level without certain levels of carcinogens or other kind of malicious byproducts that are floating around in the water that was being illegally dumped. But so I think just beyond, because to speak to the Puget Sound aspect of it, there's not much that I think George would say other than the 10th Amendment protects Washington State to regulate how they want to do it. It's state right. It's their ability.
I know an issue that is near and dear to a lot of the students here, especially those that are involved with more of the technological and computer science side, is net neutrality. The wonderful, wonderful hot topic of net neutrality. Do you or your candidate support net neutrality, or would you have the networks be more controlled by the service provider, say Charter, Google, and things like that? Josh, or Parker, start with you.
Well, I know, once again, as kind of the constitutional view on these things is we have the Fourth Amendment that protects us from the illegal search and seizures and over government encroachment on our privacy. So I guess, so is the question more saying that private companies should have a better right to be able to monitor or, I guess, control network activity, or is it more of the aspect of like the federal government kind of using NSA aspects to data mine?
The big issue that is being brought to my attention from classmates is, does private companies have the right to control bandwidth, or should it be more like how phone companies are done? Well, not, that's a bad example. Whether private companies have the ability to control specific access, or should it be remain as it is today, that if you purchase internet, you get open internet, you don't have blocks?
Okay. Yeah, it's another really kind of hot button, like complicated answer that I don't really feel comfortable answering on George's behalf, but I think it does come down to somewhat of the Fourth Amendment protecting our privacy, and I guess it's, I don't know, the people are consumer choices too, so people are going to choose which consumer or which product they want, so I don't know, it's going to come down to that, I guess, too. Sorry, I can't really answer.
No problem. Kevin?
Well, I guess it's essentially the idea that, like, you have the channels on your TV. Some of them you might have, some of them you don't. For me, since this has to do with the FCC, right?
I'm not too up on it, but I believe so.
Yeah, they control what is okay on TV and such, which to me is unconstitutional. The FCC has no right to exist. We have the First Amendment to free speech, so anyone should be able to put on when we're looking at television, anyone should be able to put a show on their network without the FCC censoring what's on it. With that said, which it seems like a scary idea, but I mean, when I talk about type of free market regulation, you're not gonna be picking channels that for your children that has a language on it you don't want your children to see. So what it kind of does, what getting rid of the FCC does would allow the parents and the people to decide what is ultimately the best answer. So as far as net neutrality, that means that the idea that every business has to have the same kind of internet access to everything, it means that is not, that we can't really do that, because that would be unconstitutional. That's controlling a business. And what I'm ultimately saying is what will happen is people will pick their internet provider that gives them the access. So the internet provider that will ultimately win is the one that keeps the internet the way it is, which means that the other providers are going to have to compete with the internet provider that says, oh, I'll let you access everything at the same speed, or I'll give you faster speed. But also what I believe, this is my opinion that I'm putting out. I don't know if any of this will happen the way I'm saying it, is that this is kind of my opinion, but people might come up with a new network, like a new way to get have a more free network. If our internet providers are censoring half the internet, maybe causing us to not be able to access things we used to, it'll encourage people to come up with a new type of technology for internet to where we can communicate with each other, perhaps without having to go through some internet provider company, like sort of like how you have your wireless networking in here. We can, throughout the school, you can bring a laptop here and you can get on the internet, but you could theoretically connect through that wireless network directly to someone else on the campus, and you don't even have an internet provider to go through. So, I believe that, essentially the decision that we can't have net neutrality was correct, but I also believe that it can bring new technologies that'll make our lives even better.
Okay. Washington State, as well as Colorado, has recently legalized marijuana, but at the federal level, it is still criminalized. Would you or your candidate keep it like that, or would you fight for it to be accepted at the federal level?
My turn, right?
Yep.
Well, the prohibition is unconstitutional. If you don't believe me, go look at how they just ask yourself why did they have to amend the Constitution to prohibit alcohol? I'm basically for complete decriminalization, not legalization. Legalization will put limits on it. Like they'll say you can only have this arbitrary amount at any time. You can only grow this arbitrary amount. You need a license to grow it, and then you need a license to manufacture with it. Then you need a license to sell it, and then you need a license to smoke it or something. I'm against all that. I'm just saying we need to just decriminalize it. Stop throwing people in jail for smoking, doing what they want to do. I may not really care for it at all, but I think people should be free to make their own decisions.
I would say George's belief on this is to leave it how it is now and let it be a state-by-state issue, and the federal government shouldn't just continue to regulate it how they have been regulating it.
Okay. Does the audience have any more questions? Alright, we are actually down to our last question that has been submitted to us. This one actually pertains to the recent protests that have been at Kiona Benton High School. I myself, and unfortunately, am not familiar with it, but it brings to question a larger question. That protests like this, the one that has been done at Kabi, from what I understand, has been happening throughout the nation as of late, not just locally, but nationally. What are your stances on these sorts of student protests? Parker?
Well, our First Amendment right does give us the freedom to assemble and to, speak how we should speak our minds. And I believe the Kaibi protests are for a teacher to be reinstated, right? Or
I honestly don't know.
I kind of remember seeing something about that. And I can just say that Georgia's stance on education is that we should not have completely public teaching be based off tenure. It should also be based off teaching ability more than just tenure alone. So I guess I'm not really quite sure where the question is going, but I mean, it's freedom of speech in general. Of if it's people protesting that they want a teacher back, they should have the right to do that and not be punished for it.
Kevin?
Yeah, I'm not really, don't really know what it's all about, if it's about, but you know, everyone has a right to protest. If it's about if it's about a teacher, I don't know what. I mean, I advocate, you know, for freedom. We shouldn't. If the kids are having some problem at school, maybe, or the parents don't like what's going on at school, I think parents should have a right to decide which school they want to send their kid to, or if they want to homeschool or pick a private school. Essentially, I'm not necessarily against public school, but what I am against is really forcing parents to have to send their kids to these schools. So, but I think the other issue with it is how we evaluate, how we're evaluating our teachers, which what you get stuck with in like public schools is there because we're forced to pay for it, and you know, we put all these different standards and stuff that our teachers have to teach the kids. And then the kids, maybe they're not learning. Maybe it's not the teacher's fault, but maybe it's the kid's fault. Maybe it is the teacher's fault, and maybe it's not the kid's fault. So what I'm saying is that ultimately the way to judge how good our teachers are would be to allow the parents to take their kids out of the class or put their kids in the class. And what I also want to say is that with our public schools, you know, we've been teaching kids the same way for a very long time. What I want to say is that maybe we need to find a new way to teach, because our kids might not be learning because the system that we've set for them isn't the best system to teach them. But it might be that they need a new way to learn. Like could we use the internet? Maybe teach kids over the internet, or maybe do we even need to set standards for people to learn? I mean, education is essentially a lifelong commitment journey. I mean, I'm learning right now, listening to some of what the other candidates are saying, and you know, it makes me think about what based on what they say or how they're talking, what I want to say. So, I mean, I believe people should, if they want the option of a public school, they should have it. If they want, I want people to really be free to have their choices, but without forcing others to really go with their options.
Awesome.
Can I clarify the issue a little?
Yes, if you have more information, please.
Okay, at the local level, I don't know what change was made. The teacher was moved from one area to a different area, and the students were objecting and wanting that teacher kept in the classroom. But over the national level, we have had a number of graduation speakers committed to speaking at graduation, and then that invitation withdrawn because of student protests against that person. This isn't quite like the student protests in the 70s where they actually sat in the administrative office to try to shut down the schools. The kids today don't know that that was a possibility. But there have been numerous student protests throughout the country over a long history of time. And so I think the question is, what is your opinion of allowing students to voice their opinion in that way rather than being shut down and told you don't have a voice because you're only students? But I think I know what you're going to say on that.
You know, ultimately they have the right to free speech. I mean, if it's a public school, if it's publicly funded, they have every right to do that. If it's a private school, then, you know, the private school can, you know, regulate students how they want. But, yeah.
Say this much.
Well, yeah, kind of the same thing. It's just going with the First Amendment again. I mean, there is one clause on the First Amendment that does say if the freedom or the speech is promoting, what is it, a clear and present danger to the people, then they have the right to be shut down. So as long as the student protests aren't getting to the point where they're presenting a clear and present danger that could endanger their lives or some sort of property, then they should be able to do what they feel is right. Speak.
And that will bring this lovely debate to a close. Before we adjourn, do you both have closing statements you'd like to make?
Just overall, please I guess you'll get your ballots July 16th, 18th. Be sure to vote for George Sika for your 4th Congressional District position.
Just make sure you're educated on who you're voting for. That's all I have to say.
Can I ask a question now of all of you? One of the candidates who could not be here today suggested that we should sponsor a televised debate among all the candidates at once. I don't know how practical that is, and he actually thought I had the ability to set it up. But it would have to, of course, go through our PR person, and I don't know that the college is necessarily the best group to do that. But what is your opinion of having a debate between 12 different candidates at one time?
Well,
televised.
I think it should be done. I really believe people need to see who they're voting for. I'm running because, I know this sounds, I generally wouldn't vote otherwise. I'm running because I'm about the only person I'd vote. I'm the only person I'd vote for. I really don't. I don't see too much in all the other candidates that are running. I just think people really need to be educated on the candidates and know who's running and why they're running and what they really believe as far as the Constitution and freedom and people's pursuit of happiness.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think obviously George would enjoy actually being able to do one of those, but also just with 10 or 12 people, it's going to get messy, and you're going to have to really lay down like some constraints and laws on getting people to be able to only have so much time to speak, and also not getting into kind of a little shouting battle on stage or anything. But I think that's what we need. We need transparency within government. We need transparency to see how people actually are, instead of just having like a letter show up in the mail or whatever it is. It's better to actually have exposure for the candidates, I believe. So I'd want to see one of those. I'd like to see it.
One thing people should do is have their video cameras and go chase these guys down too.
I really appreciate your coming today. I know that takes a chunk out of your time. and I know we didn't get as many students as we had hoped we would have. We sent out invitations to every student on campus through the media the school uses for students, or through the ASB media, and I personally sent out invitations to 100 students saying, be here. It wasn't really an invitation, it was
Yeah,
more like a get here. But we tried.
Oh, yeah.
I,
No, it's like you said too, though. It's there's 2 weeks left before finals too.
Yeah.
And it's a challenging time for everybody. I think.
well, I think it
It's
also.
really challenging to convince the students that even young people need to be well informed.
Yeah.
And even if they aren't old enough to vote, they need to be informed on what's going on and try to influence their friends who can vote.
Yeah.
Very true. On behalf of the debate team, I'd like to thank you again for coming.
Thank you.
For everybody, we do have some documentation from some of the candidates up here. Please feel free to take some. And I hope everybody has a great day, and since it's almost summer break, have a great summer break as well.
Thanks.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.